Welcome back to ESSA TV, the series where we reach out to prominent individuals to promote economic discourse. ESSA TV has been on hiatus for the past 3 years, but we are back, and we couldn't have asked for a better guest to help us relaunch the series. The Honourable Steve Bracks AC served as the Premier of Victoria from 1999 to 2007, and currently serves as the Chairman of Cbus Super. Mr. Bracks, thank you very much for joining us today.
Very pleased to be here as part of this program.
I'd like to begin by asking you about your work with the government of Timor Leste. What lessons can a developing economy like Timor Leste's learn from our developed economy? And conversely, are there mistakes from our economic experience that developing economies can learn from?
Well, it's very difficult for a country like Timor Leste, one of the newest independent countries in the world. I took up a role there advising the Prime Minister when I left as Premier in 2007. And really, it's probably not comparable to any experience that we've had or we've gone through. We have a developed democracy, a developed economy. They really had to start from scratch after 374 years of Portuguese colonial rule and 24 years of Indonesian rule, and the infrastructure really destroyed in the country. A quarter of the population killed, and part of that 24 years under Indonesian colonial rule. So it's a rebuilding exercise. But in rebuilding, I guess the effort was to make sure it was democratic and open, and that's really what has occurred as it's moved from a United Nations mandate into a fully fledged democracy. So its task is really to find a way of encouraging trade of surplus value, for example on rice and maize and coffee, to try and get surplus value from that and to trade that both across Asia, but also more importantly across into the other part of Timor, into West Timor. Secondly, to develop agriculture and to get more yield out of crops, and simply one in a monsoonal country to encourage capitalisation of agriculture, investment in irrigation, getting more yield, getting more production, and be able to trade that. And the third is tourism. It's a beautiful country, mountainous, great white sandy beaches, but it needs a lot of infrastructure. It needs a good water supply. It needs sanitation, obviously, to separate that from the groundwater. It needs better roads, and coming with that will come the opportunity for tourism, and training people in tourism will be part of it. So they're really sort of parts of the future for that country.
In your memoirs, you write that population growth and multiculturalism used to divide the states. Why was this the case? Is this division still occurring, and how can it be remedied to ensure a united approach to boosting Australia's economic prosperity?
I think there is a difference in the states in relation to population growth and the attitudes to migration as part of that, and also multiculturalism. And that was no more stark than, I guess, in my period in office when in New South Wales the Cronulla riots happened in New South Wales, and all the consequential issues around that. Very unlikely that would have happened in Victoria, because our migration is older. It goes back to the 1890s and that post-gold period where we were a wealthy country and people coming from all over the world to settle here. We had such a diversity in our community in that gold rush period. We had a big wave post the Second World War of migration, and that has embedded and developed. And because of really the economics of Victoria and Melbourne in particular, that you can live and work in a range of suburbs. You're not pushed into an enclave into low economic area, socio-economic areas as you are, say, in Sydney in the west. You can live in probably about 15 to 20 different suburbs. And third, of course, we have a different media here that has always, more recently, has not been racist in its sort of overtones or attitudes. We don't have a situation where they did in New South Wales, where Alan Jones was calling on the population to reclaim their beach. That we'd probably put someone in jail if they incited a riot in that point of view. So I think those reasons, longevity of migration, the economic circumstances which are here where you can migrate to a large number of areas, we've seen a different reception for migration, a different reception of multiculturalism, and I think that's still the case here in Victoria.
The Bracks government oversaw $12 billion worth of public-private partnerships, completing projects such as Southern Cross Station, the new Royal Children's Hospital and the Wonthaggi desalination plant. How important were PPPs to your government, and are they currently being underutilised by the state and federal governments?
We were largely the government that introduced public-private partnerships. There was some build, own, operate and transfer projects around the country, but we brought in the public-private partnerships largely, and we embarked on a program of seeing infrastructure enhanced by PPPs. And we did that for a reason, that we knew our existing balance sheet wasn't sufficient to fund the infrastructure that Victoria needed. And we wanted to bring it forward for future generations, and bringing financing from the private sector, bringing the expertise from the private sector in managing those assets was extremely important. And if we could get a bonus as well by the funding under the accounting rules being off balance sheet, and therefore keeping our AAA credit rating, maximising our funding for the essential services, health, education, other areas, that was an added benefit. So yes, I think it was an important step that we took to undertake a number of those. I think much more could be done now, not just toll roads, which are probably easy PPPs, but a whole range of areas. Low cost housing, affordable housing, which I think is one of the biggest issues really facing this country, and making sure that you can get some private investment in that, defraying the cost through a public contribution, and getting that social housing built over a period of time would be one of the things you could do really in PPPs in the future.
You touched on affordable housing there.
Yeah.
Are there other solutions you see to this issue in the near future and also in the long term?
I don't think the answer to affordable housing is continual to apply subsidies. All subsidies do, whether it's stamp duty exemptions or first home owner subsidies, is build demand for infrastructure and largely put up the price through demand. I think you need to look at supply, so investment in housing, governments partnering with the private sector for social housing and providing extra housing. I think we need to continue to look at more urban density in our cities as well, and to make sure that that's a part of the development and supply issue in the future. I think that's an important one, and I think we also have got to look at decentralisation projects. Areas that are affordable for people to move in, not just in cities but in regions, and to assist and support in making those regions available to people to settle. So that means building fast rail links, good commuter access, so that you can work in, say, Melbourne, and live in a Ballarat, Bendigo, along the Latrobe Valley, and have much more affordable housing as a result of that. I think we need to look at those areas as well.
You mentioned HighSpeed Rail, and that's something that's brought up consistently at almost every federal election. Do you see a high-speed rail link between the eastern capitals being developed in the future? And how can Australia ensure that this does one day happen?
I think it's almost inevitable there'll be a fast rail between Melbourne and Sydney. Melbourne and Sydney is the second busiest, second most used air route in the world, the most custom in the world. You've got 4.23 million people in Sydney, almost 4 million people in Melbourne. You've got an enormous sort of appetite really for fast commuter rail between those two capital cities, and I think we should just get on and do it. I'm convinced it will happen. The tragedy for Australia is it's taking so long for that to happen, and you look at what's happening in every other part of the world, you can see fast rail is a feature of most other communities across Europe, across the US even now. You're seeing that developed across Asia, across China, across Japan, and I think we should do it. And we should also look at value capture in areas on that rail corridor, which can be developed as part of funding the project as well, by developing some of those decentralised communities that can develop between Melbourne and Sydney as a way of assisting in the capital requirement. So yes, I think it should happen. In a very small way, I did a bit of that when I was in government, in re-establishing the rail lines between Ballarat, Bendigo, along the Latrobe Valley, putting down concrete sleepers, putting down optic fibre on the rail lines, having rolling stock going 160 and trying to get around an hour travel between those areas. And I did that not because we just simply wanted a fast rail link, but because we wanted to create economic communities similar to Europe where you can live and work in different areas. And that's exactly what should happen between Melbourne and Sydney as well. Regrettably, this has been caught up in either disputes about where the route should be, or secondly, by putting too much into it. Putting Brisbane in, putting Canberra in. Let's start with Sydney, Melbourne, get that underway, and I'm sure you'll see other fast rail develop once that's done.
Your memoirs include an almost scathing chapter on the Greens, whom you refer to as the Green Party. The reason for this is that, whilst the Greens are disdainful of party politics and appear to care about a wide range of areas, they only truly care for the environment and are prepared to engage in political manoeuvring, such as refusing to support Kevin Rudd's ETS. What is your view on the future of the Greens, both at a state and federal level, and how can Labor regain supporters who have switched their allegiance?
Well, I think the reality is that the Greens are a political party. They're contesting in elections, federal and state, and local government. They're contesting as a political party, but they'd like to market themselves as almost anti-politics. Well, that's not true. I mean, it should be called for what it is. They are engaged as a political party, happy to do deals as a political party, happy to stand as a party in office. So I think that's important, number one. Number two, I guess I worry about some of the hypocrisy that's there, and I saw that firsthand, I guess, when we were trying with Melbourne 2030 to look at urban consolidation and transport hubs and nodes, and looking at much more density in middle and inner suburbs, which philosophically the Green Party agreed with, because it would stop the urban sprawl, stop the spread of Melbourne, and make sure we had a much more livable and economic base case for Melbourne itself. They were opposing it because their votes accrued in the inner city areas, and when something occurred close to their backyard, they opposed it, even though philosophically they could see the value of the project overall, for example. So that tells me they're a political party. That tells me that they're really about sort of gaining power. Look, the Labor Party and the Green Party are aligned on a whole range of issues. There's no question about that. But I think it would help the Green political party if they had a time in office and understood what governing was about, and then had to undertake the sort of the compromises required to bring about change.
In your memoirs, you write of your involvement as the manager of Youth Guarantee and your interest in long-term unemployment. One of the most publicised federal unemployment policies of recent times is the Youth Jobs Path program. In your opinion, is this an effective way of curbing long-term youth unemployment, or is a different policy approach needed?
I don't think it's that effective really in curbing long-term unemployment. Most programs in addressing long-term unemployment are really just a cyclical program. They're there when long-term unemployment is high, and they're there in order to, if you like, shuffle the pack. That when economic recovery occurs, when employment growth occurs, the last people to come on board to get a job are those people who have been long-term unemployed. So what can you do to assist them to be able to gain those new jobs? And that is intervening. That is providing support or subsidies for employers to take them on, or looking at developing, for example, training and support to assist them in taking on those jobs in the future. That's important, but that's all it is. It doesn't create any new jobs. So the federal government program is not creating any new jobs. It's simply enabling long-term unemployed to get access to those jobs, and that's a good thing. That's useful. But to create long-term employment growth, you need to tackle structural unemployment, and that is really about identifying areas in the economy that can grow and developing those.
What sorts of areas can be grown and developed into the future?
Well, I think we've got to face the fact that we can no longer compete on low-value consumer goods in a high-wage, high-cost country. Textile, clothing and footwear and the industry went offshore some time ago. White goods went offshore some time ago. Regrettably, the car industry is now gone. We need to compete in relation to our skills and abilities and the high-value, high-wage jobs that result from that. So investment in education is extremely important to make sure we've got the best possible skills that we can have in this country. Look, for example, in Germany, that encourage people to study in design and engineering, and pay people to study and co-locate their polytechnics and their training colleges next to industry in that area, and look what they're doing in a high-cost, high-wage country and developing those innovations. We need to identify those areas of the economy that we want to invest in. I've mentioned when I was in government that one of those areas was medical biotechnology, where we have a historic a sort of base, if you like, in some of the great innovations that we've undertaken. We need to encourage and develop that even further and invest in it and encourage its development. High value manufacturing design, whether that's in aeronautical design, in passenger motor vehicle design, even though we don't have the assembly companies anymore, we do still have the design facilities and capacity here in Australia, and we should be involved in that, and design in all its areas. And going with that is education, and I think the best investment we can make is in the education of the workforce.
You write that Labor needs to project their core values into the electorate in order to win back voters, rather than engaging in, quote, populist day-by-day politics. However, this is becoming increasingly difficult with today's 24-hour news cycle across TV, radio, print, the internet, and perhaps more importantly, social media. How does a political party ensure that their key messages are getting out without looking like they're neglecting the hot button issue of the day?
I think if you keep focusing on the hot button issue of the day, then no one will ever know what you stand for. No one will ever get any idea of your values, what you want to achieve, what you want to do in the future. And I think we've just got to, as I said, I guess in my memoirs, we've got to stand up for our core values. That is a fair go for all, investment in education, social safety nets, which are important for whether that's in the health system or in the social security system, and encouraging and developing an open economy with job growth in that economy as well. We've got to stand up for those things we believe in. And I think sometimes that means that you might not want to comment on the hot button issue of the day. You might not want to respond, but you respond on the things you want to do and achieve. And I think if you do that, there might be some short-term disadvantages, but long-term you'll see some advantages. And I'll give you a good example. When Paul Keating and Bob Hawke is Prime Minister, Paul Keating is Treasurer, were embarking on opening up the Australian economy in the 1980s and 90s, when they were, which seems self-evident now, when they were floating the Australian dollar, when they were getting rid of tariff walls and having an open trading system, when they were allowing foreign banks to come in, when they were bringing in competition policy to ensure that there wasn't monopolies that are occurring in the public or private sector in Australia, but having open competition, which led to better benefits for Australians, if you like. When they were doing all that, each one of those at a different time were unpopular, but overall the policy, because they explained it, because they articulated it, because it did have benefits long term, were accepted and supported, and they won election after election after bringing in significant economic reform into this country and opening up this country to the rest of the world. It was a protected, isolated country which had tariff walls built up over a long period of time, and they opened that up. They smashed it and changed it. And if they had given in, for example, to a trade union who was complaining about the tariff walls going in the textile, clothing and footwear industry, and simply conceded on that and sort of not pursued it. If they had given in to a vested interest group who wanted to keep a monopoly in the public or private sector, then they might have got some short-term benefit, they wouldn't have got the long-term gain. So I think it can be done. It's shown it can be done. Everyone looks back there now and say how magnificent it was. It was because they had a program which they sold, which they developed and sold, and publicly articulated effectively, and they stuck to it. And I think that's the lesson for the future for governments as they go forward.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for the opportunity.